Everybody's doing good today. It is Wednesday for WTF Wednesdays, and we have Michelle Griffin here today with Griffin Resources. And it's great to have you back with us again, Michelle. You've been doing pretty good, keeping yourself busy.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Lots of lots of work, which is good.
Nice. Nice, nice, nice. And as we kick things off, Michelle, if you could give us a little bit background about yourself and your organization for anybody that's not familiar with you, that would be awesome.
Sure. So my background is in HR. I have now, I mean, I probably started in 2011 in HR. Before that, I was an auto theft investigator, whole nother life. But um, I um, I was
That
the
sounds
head of
more
HR.
interesting.
I didn't like having to be client like customer facing and dealing with so I went internal and then I realized HR is nothing but the same kind of customer service, just internal people. I just get to make up the policies and then enforce them, which made that a lot
Yeah.
easier. But I was the head of HR at ConnectWise. So that kind of kept me a little more involved in the tech side. When ConnectWise started to sell, I left when all the owners left. And I went to a residential construction company and I was there for a couple of years. I got my master's in something called industrial organizational psychology. It's a research degree of human capital. I started getting my dissertation in that in 2018. And so once I was a couple years into that, I switched into kind of direct consulting. That didn't last very long before I ended up just creating a company, hiring employees, and supporting multiple small to mid-sized businesses with their HR. So we started creating a model of essentially fractional recruiting and fractional HR, and it kind of took off in the market space. I now have about 45 team members and about 80 clients. Most of
Nice.
that is nationwide. Some of that is worldwide. We do have some foreign parent companies with subsidiaries here in the US. Their client base is pretty widespread. Everything from our smallest company is 2 employees, our largest is 500. And some of that we may be the entire HR department for HR, payroll, recruiting, and other companies, it might just be a piece or a section of that. And we kind of just customize that to whatever they might need.
So
Um,
I have a question for you
yeah.
on the foreign owned entities.
Mm-hmm.
Are they a little frustrating with the you having to tell them, yeah, you can't do that here?
So most of the time, they are more strict in their countries. Most countries are more employee friendly. They really like working in the U.S. because we're more employer friendly, with the exception of California and New York. Those tend to function more like Europe
I'm
or
in
other
I'm in
foreign
I'm in
entities.
California, so
Yeah, so then
Yeah.
it looks it. So most of the time they start asking us which states we recommend that they work in, and they'll make decisions based on taxes and employment law. You know how loosely based they are. Florida, here in Florida where I'm at, is a really good one because there's not a lot of state regulations. At least they're starting to build up more now, but for a lot of time it was just leaning towards the federal, and everything would just lean on just basic bare minimums. And you could write whatever you wanted in your policies, and as long as you had policies and enforce them, you could do pretty much whatever you wanted. So a lot of states have started to get more with the requirements of required paid leave, required sick leave, required paid FMLA, things like that, which foreign
I
companies
need
are
to get the
used to
right
having.
vein up for that one.
Yeah. Well, I have a feeling that that Eric's asking about the foreign component of it because him being in Southern California, he probably is ready to open up a Mexican MSP, and so he's
There
going
you
to go
go.
down to
There's no tariff
Tijuana,
on labor yet.
right? Yeah, he's going to go down to Tijuana and open up his his practice down there, and So I'm sure he's just, looking for some
The border
insights.
control there would just be amazing to work with.
Right, right. Well, I just want to say congratulations. I mean, that's a great success story, going from, working for a vendor in the channel, leaping out on your own, just kind of going through a process, and, as we all know, it doesn't happen overnight. And sometimes things don't happen as we had anticipated, and we have to pivot and make changes. And as I always say, things always work out for the better, from that perspective. A blast from the past. I had a conversation with Amy Carr yesterday, and I was mentioning her that you are on today's call, and she's like, "Oh yeah, we used to work together, back in the days." So I don't know how long ago that was, but
Years,
uh,
probably.
yeah. So HR is definitely a big area of topic that we probably don't talk about enough. I think there's so much that we can do. I mean, when we think about it, when it comes to our greatest assets, I mean, our people, and our time is the most valuable assets that we have in our companies, and being service businesses. Today, we're going to break down how to properly build employee handbooks and how they can protect your MSP from legal risk, clarify expectations, and strengthen culture. If you're just using a generic template or haven't updated yours in years, you don't want to miss out on what we're going to talk about today. And reading that last line, it hasn't been updated in years. I'll probably be the first to admit that it's been a long time. It's our existing handbook is probably 15 years old and has had very
Oh
little
my God.
edits. Yeah. I mean, it's been edited over the years, but that's
Can I come
the
work for you? I won't be there long. I won't be there long.
Yeah, I mean the current version of it, I think it was recreated 15 years ago, and we have had edits, over the years, but it probably could use a major overhaul. And with that being said, I'm going to turn things over to Michelle, and thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna see if I can make sure to share my screen properly. Maybe if it'll let me pick a screen to share. Why is this not working? Share, which one? One, enhanced sharing options. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Why can't I just, what's it want to do? I have three screens and I don't know what it wants me to do. It's labeled my screens, but now I don't know how to physically share one. And I don't think nothing's sharing, right? Let's see.
No,
Yeah.
nothing sharing.
Click on the one that you want to share. It'll have a little green square around it.
That's what I expected to happen, and then that didn't happen. It just labeled all three screens, 1, 2, and 3.
It didn't.
And then now I am
Okay,
just trying to
so it
figure
does
out.
say screen 1, 2, and 3 separately. Okay.
Yeah. Let me see if I can read this. Multiple and share. It says, what does it want from me? Why are you not working? Share.
As you're pulling that up,
What do you want? Oh, there it goes.
Okay.
Now it's finally gave a pop-up.
There we go.
That or it was gone before.
Hey, why did I just get your Amazon cart?
I was going to
Like,
say the same thing, dude.
is it sharing the right screen? Are
And
you
now it's
seeing an
sharing the
employee
speaker.
handbook
It's
page?
sharing the speaker view, but
Oh, that's not what I wanted.
Yeah.
Hold on. Let's see. Stop that. And how do I share?
Should be able to hit end slideshow on that one screen there, and then
Hold on. There's. Oh, come on. This is what happens when I have like a techie husband set everything up for me. And then I don't know how to use any of it. Let's see if I can try. It said I tried to pick. This should be. Okay, let's try that. Make sure I did that right. Now, am I sharing the right screen?
it says it started, and it's there we go. There we go. Now we have the full
Uh,
slide. We're in good
Perfect.
shape now. Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Sorry for my lack
That's
of
all right.
technical expertise over here. Okay. Um, so what are the first things that I guess I'm probably just start on the next slide because it's probably going to go over a lot of the things I want to talk about anyway. Did it switch? No. Now I have to get things to toggle. There we go. Um, so the one major thing I usually try to point out to business owners is the handbook is for your benefit, not necessarily for your employees. There are no legal requirements to have a handbook. However, there are legal requirements to provide notices and policies to your employees. And a handbook is the best way to do that because you're putting everything in one place. Also, having your employees sign off on the handbook can protect you legally because it's going to give you a place where they're acknowledging that they're going to they have received, read, and have the opportunity to understand the handbook. And so if they violate something, you can stand on that to discipline them and ultimately terminate them. Um, and so especially when you're needing to, make a case, obviously most states are at will. So you can let people go for no reason at all, as long as it's not for a discriminatory reason. And then a lot of times that burden of proof can fall back on you to defend yourself on, that it was not for a discriminatory reason if they have, a case that it was. So, or at least potentially optically could have been. So that's kind of why it's really important to have the handbook do very specific things that you want your staff to know about. So that's why obviously some of the major points are, clear expectations, that it has different stages of their employment referenced. So if like, for example, that you may not think to have like your code of conduct in there, or certain other things that can be non-mandatory, just a little bit more fluffy. That kind of just also helps protect the company. And I'll tell a couple of fun stories along the way if I can recall a few things. I do remember at ConnectWise, we had to add "Do not sleep at your desk" to the handbook because that wasn't. We were like, you shouldn't be doing this, and they're like, there's no rule saying I can't, and I'm technically on my break, and we're like, you're gonna call this a break because you fell asleep at your desk. So we added. We had
I'll
to
share.
add things
I've got
like
a great
that.
one to share on that one.
Go ahead.
Our handbook includes you must wear underwear.
Oh God.
There's always a story for those.
Yes, when the HR person, when our HR consultant said, "Yeah, you need to add this," I'm like, I don't even want to know why. Just put it in there.
I do recall this was I was pretty young when I started HR. I want to say I might have been 28. I don't know if I had turned 29 yet. And I had been on the job for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And there was a woman who had just been hired. It was her first day. She was probably twice my age. And the HR manager, who was about that woman's age, came to me and said, I needed to go tell this woman to put on a bra. And I was like, I'm new. I don't even know how to like tie my shoes yet. Like, what are you talking about? And she's like, I need you to do this because I don't want to. And I was like, oh my goodness. So it was during her she'd already been working most of the morning at her desk and with people and stuff. And then she comes in for her orientation meeting. And I was like, it's been brought to my attention that you're either not wearing undergarments or you're not wearing properly supporting undergarments. And I'm going to need you to put on a proper supporting undergarments. She went out and got a sports bra by lunch.
Wow.
So
much
yeah.
So certain things I think are more industry specific to your MSP, or in the tech world in general. A lot of that you'll probably be already aware of. So cybersecurity, different tech regulations, especially when it comes to working remote, remoting in, and in certain situations, depending on the type of clients that you're servicing, HIPAA can come into play too, depending on what you're remoting into on your client's side. So if there's in any way a chance for your employees to be exposed to certain regulation or to certain data that is under regulatory compliance, then you do want to think about, training or having policies outlined so that you protect the company, saying that you already have, strict policies when it comes to different data exposures and risks and things like that. And obviously, I'll tell more fun stories because I'm not under a non-compete anymore or a non-disclosure. So with there was one fun thing with lab tech because they could, use lab tech to remote in to the clients and do troubleshooting and things like that for, the tech space. The team members would like screenshot what the client was doing throughout the process and kind of helping them just kind of deal with whatever their tech issues were. But when they did that, because it happened to be a medical company, they were screenshotting sensitive data of an end user, and that put the company under huge HIPAA issues. And so there was a lot of legal stuff that had to happen there, a lot of training once the exposure was found. And then obviously you can definitely still work through things like that. You just need to make sure anything is blurred out, nothing is, saved and breached and things like that. So you can still do your job. You just have to make sure you're not saving any sensitive data. So it just takes a lot of training for that. So depending on, same kind of thing with like bank account information, random stuff that your people may or may not come in contact with. So you're going to this is where it kind of protects you as a company, obviously your people too. But if you don't have these policies and you don't have your risk set up, you can, your insurance can also deny your claim. You could also, have lower, premiums and things like that with your liability insurance or your cybersecurity insurance if you have more policies and procedures in place. So it kind of helps you out a lot more too if you can say, yes, I have these policies, and then you can point to them right away.
And Michelle, I just wanted to mention, your team's notifications were popping up. I just want to make sure that nothing's showing up.
Now I'm going to ask for help. How do I stop that? Is there like a thing where you can say do not disturb or something somewhere?
Just close Teams.
Well,
yeah, in your team status window. So if you go into your teams, you'll see your profile icon on the top right. You click on your profile icon, and then there's the yours probably says green available or maybe red busy. Just change that to do not disturb.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I changed it. Hopefully nothing weird came through. As I was talking about weird sensitive data.
Yeah.
Nothing crazy came up.
Yeah, no, you're good. I think we're safe. So, yep.
Thanks. Any questions on like specific things that are more industry specific to you guys? Because this is really much the slide that covers that. No? Okay, moving on. Or not. There it goes. Let me come back with my mouse. Okay, so there's certain things that you can add to your handbook that can define more of like your company culture and things like that too. So this is like the fluffier stuff. So when we're writing handbooks for companies, we usually ask them if they have like a mission statement, if they have any type of letter from the CEO or owner, whatever, kind of just any kind of fluffier stuff that you can put in there. So you can intro and do company culture stuff in the very beginning. There's a couple things that I also like to do with that. And you can add some policies around your company culture. So if you do have core values and someone is not living up to your core values, and it is specifically in your handbook, and you have policies that pretty much require people to live up to those core values and they're not, then you can discipline them for that. It doesn't actually have to be like a real rule was broken. It can be that they're just, not living up to the culture that you want. So you have the ability to define your culture and then make people live up to it. And if they're not, you can, right size for that. So oftentimes, there's just, if they're like, well, I don't have a rule, it's not necessarily something you can put in your code of conduct because it's just a little, I don't know, vague or fluffy kind of things. You can kind of define that, which really helps you out if you're a small company or growing, you can be intentional about it. So, and then you kind of go into your employment policies. A lot of times we have, different expectations, your paid time off policies, your list of your holidays, kind of all of that stuff you expect to have in there. And obviously the security and compliance side of things. And if there's going to be performance and conduct, and then your grievances and your disciplines kind of at the end. So there's kind of an outline for things, but those are pretty much the primary categories that we make sure are in each of the handbooks. It can also, and I'm sure I've got a slide in here somewhere for it, but there's I do at one point, I'll probably talk about it a couple of times, about different states. If you're multi-state, it's really important to have, we usually add state addendums rather than try to squish all states into one handbook, because a lot of times your state regulations can vary and something is going to be required in one state and not in another. And you can generally set rules that are going to be applicable across different states, and other states it may not make sense to do that, so you can have a state addendum that just calls out a different treatment in that state should you want to do that. And a lot of times we kind of have a catch-all that will they'll default to the regulatory laws and things like that. So if there's a law that is newer and supersedes what's in the handbook, that the company will follow the law, regulation, and things like that. Good example for those that may not know, even a simple thing is your categorizing of time. So those in California, overtime is anything over 8 hours per day, not over 40 hours in a work week. Whereas most other states, it's anything over 40 hours, and you can kind of make up your rules as you like. If you wanted to default everyone to California to say you'll consider overtime over 8 hours a day, regardless of the state, you could do that because you're favoring the employees. And it goes towards it makes their lives better. So anything that makes their lives better is allowed, but you can't make things worse. So if you only have one employee in California and the rest of your employees are somewhere else, you have to comply. That one person in California has to comply with that regulation, versus the rest of your people can be overtime at 40 hours. Again, this is hourly, not salaried people, but as an example. That makes sense, everyone? Good, kind of what that different states can do to you. Exactly. We saw a lot of that happen with companies that were especially during COVID, they'd say, well, I can hire anybody regardless of where they live, not realizing how complex and different the rules really can be when you get minutia into things. Anyway, so again, this talks about your tone, your culture, your core values. Some of the things that you'll want to even consider is what you call your company. If you want to call it a firm or essentially the word company, or if you want to call it a corporation or whatever you want to call it. And so making sure that's consistent. So if you have an older handbook that you've kind of just updated throughout the timeline, whoever added those policies, wherever they were written, especially if you just had something from an attorney, something can come across really legal and really stringent, and the rest of your handbook could, have a better, lighter tone to it. And as long as the message is coming across, you can, kind of do things however you want. You can add little jokes. You can, you're talking about, I think in one handbook, there was the discussion of not taking virtual calls in the bathroom, which, it's kind of so you can kind of add your own spin to things and make sure things are just kind of funnier, whatever, and a little serious, please actually don't do that. But, so those are some of the things, but just staying, it's good to stay consistent, but also just keeping in mind to be intentional with some of those things.
And I know in the very beginning when we had put together our handbook, we were doing a lot more frequent updating just because there were a lot of things that were wow, didn't even think I needed to put that in there. Like you talked about those virtual calls, or the amount of time being spent in a bathroom, or, like you mentioned, undergarments, and I think that's one thing that if you're just putting your handbook together, if you feel like you're adding a lot to it in the beginning, I feel that that's probably fairly common. And then, as you progress, you know, you do have some character that decides to do something unique, and you're like, oh, we got to add this over time.
This is why you
Yeah,
have a pro do it. They've seen a lot already.
Right.
and typically what we do is we'll work with our clients to hold on, this is probably not something you can see, but there it goes. Um, we'll revamp it once a year, and a lot of employment laws change once a year. Or throughout the year. And sometimes you should change things immediately when the rules change, if it's a mid-year something crazy, or at least updating those specific policies to add that. Like, for example, this was a couple of years ago, Illinois created a required sick time regulation for part-time employees, and it launched on like June 1st in like 2023, I think. So it was a weird middle of the year. So for clients in Illinois, Chicago specifically, we pretty much said, you can update your handbook to this policy, and or just kind of reference it and have an outside policy and pull it into the handbook at the end of the year. So there's a few things that it's good to keep notes. So most of the time we'll keep notes throughout the whole year of just things that if it doesn't have to be changed immediately, just changing it once a year, but kind of going through and giving it a whole review and overhaul once a year is usually good enough. And I think I might even have a thing that says every 12 months is good, but kind of having a running list and then updating it is perfectly good, as long as you're also keeping up with what the laws are, and have notices and things like that update you. There's different things you can subscribe to. Legal, a lot of lawyer employment laws, lawyers will have updates and things like that they send out to keep people updated. So if you already in with a corporate attorney or have law firms you work with, a lot of times they'll have notices that let you know about things. So in the employment policy section, there's kind of some things that you need to say. The at-will statement is, I would say, typically required. Most of our clients put them in different places. Also on like the offer letter, it's there as well, because you don't want them to, because even if you say that, unless they're under contract, because then you can take away at will, like basically saying they have to give a notice before they leave. Pretty much at will means they can leave or you can fire them without notice. So unless you have them under contract, you should, specifically state that regardless of these policies and procedures, that you're not violating their at will. The EEO and ADA compliance, that really helps with fair treatment and legal requirements. You have to at least notify people of what to do if they need an accommodation for a disability. I was actually recently talking with a client or potential client, actually, I think it was during a sales call, that they explained that they were already under legal, they were already in the middle of a lawsuit because a person didn't ask for an accommodation. They fired them, and then they were coming after them for not accommodating a disability that they never even asked for. And they had to prove that they that they had the posters posted that says, if you have a disability, this is who you contact, that it's in your handbook stating that, it's the same thing. If you need an accommodation or if you have a disability, here's who you go to. So those are the kinds of things where that's the first time I've ever seen anyone say, I didn't get something I didn't ask for. And file a lawsuit. Yeah. But I guess you can file lawsuits for anything. Right. And so they're having to defend themselves that way. And so something like this, as simple as just pointing to your handbook and pointing to the posters on the wall, is what will save you. Which that's the first time I think I've ever been able to say that, because most of the time I was like, the posters, So that's the other thing of there's like required poster notices that if you're digital or everyone's remote, just having it on your intranet. So if you have a SharePoint or anything intranet, you can put your digital posters there. Perfect. If you guys know what posters I'm talking about, before I just randomly say posters. Okay, good.
All the posters, they're like, all right, this just doesn't mesh with my brand. The look of our
over my
office.
office, and my wife has them at her home office. And also,
Oh,
she
that's
does HR
dedicated.
for her 1,000-person firm and does ours on the side. Yeah, she goes nuts with it. And I'm in New York, so
Oh yeah, that's
it
definitely
gets
like a
updated
big thing there.
every year. Yeah.
And all right, so moving on from that. So the day-to-day operations, this is kind of like those code of conducts, working hours, stating when you're open for business. And that really helps when people, especially when they're salaried, because if they're salaried, you really can't discipline them for like not showing up to work necessarily, but you can discipline them for missing meetings, not getting their work done, not performing to the standards of their job description, and things like that. But because they're salaried, they're not tied to physical clock in, clock out like an hourly employee would be. So saying, that you have specific business hours and setting those expectations can really help you when it comes to managing salaried people that aren't performing well. Obviously outlining all your different PTO, your vacation, your sick, your holidays, and clarifying that just gives that one single location. So people, that's usually what people, when they're looking at the handbook and referencing it, because usually they don't sit there and read all 50 freaking pages of it or however long it is. So that is another place to just kind of keep it all where that's where they're going to typically go look. So if that's out of date, and not compliant, then, or at least not real with what you actually do, or it's outdated, then that would probably be the first thing to start fixing, because that's what people look for. Your communication expectations, especially when it comes to technology, if you have like Slack and different Slack channels, email, ticketing, and how you want people communicating and how you don't want them communicating is something to put in there. So if someone violates something, you have you have a policy again to stand on for that. So a lot of times this comes to using their equipment for personal use is typically what we see. And when you take especially if you're taking the company computer back, and they start saying, well, I have personal stuff on there that I want to get off, and you're trying to terminate them right away and immediately and things like that. And so it's one of those things where you really should define personal use and non-personal use and make sure that they're not using it for personal use, or at least stating that they shouldn't. We've had tons of clients where they're like, what do we do? Do we give them a chance to take stuff off the computer? We don't even, do we sit there and watch them take stuff off the computer? What do we do? And it just depends on how nice you want to be about it. So
I'm not nice. Company machine, it's all company business. There shouldn't be anything personal on it, and end of story. I mean, it just,
that's how we wipe it and pretty much say you shouldn't have had anything personal on it. You're lost, kind of thing.
A little behind here, but I did throw in our principles and values as a PDF into chat. I just yanked our logos off of it, so I just shared that. If you guys just want to see what someone else is doing, that's out there for you guys.
And thank you for sharing that. That's great. The dress code has, I would say it depends on when and where in the world you may want to like deal with the changes of the way that the government is changing DE&I. They're going after private companies, mainly bigger ones, and private universities and things like that. But so right now they're pretty much sticking to government agencies for the most part. But a lot of times your dress code, if I would say, try not to discriminate against male or female if you can help it. But again, that may be changing. You can, I've seen company dress code specifically say, men should be dressing like this and women should be dressing like this. Or it's better practice to get away from that and just state professional or, casual in the office, or, business casual at client facing, situations, events, on site, things like that.
So Eric can't wear a dress to work anymore?
So technically, if Eric wants to wear a dress, so yeah, there was
I really prefer
it's like that's where you kind of get the it needs to be past your fingertips against your thigh kind of thing. Make sure it's longer than your knees. But anyway, there's fun dress code, fun ConnectWise. There Arnie had a thing about not letting girls wear, or I guess guys didn't. I mean, he didn't necessarily say all girls. However, it was basically not wearing heels that were bigger than 4 inches, I believe was the rule. And I didn't mind enforcing it because I thought as a safe, I mean, he just thought they looked like hooker heels. But I was like, I don't mind enforcing it because I think it's also a safety issue. What if we have to evacuate? And we don't want people running around in 4-inch heels. So I didn't think it was that crucial of a dress code policy. But it got to the point where Arnie would go around and get on the ground. If you guys know ConnectWise, if you can envision Arnie doing this, he would get on the ground with a ruler and measure women's heels and then make them take off their shoes or change their shoes, I guess, if they were in violation. So we pretty much had to tell Arnie to stop doing that. And if he saw a violation to let us know, and that HR would handle it. But it was.
I mean, I
could totally see
up,
Arnie doing that.
I went to Catholic high school, so we had all kinds of rules. For guys, we couldn't have hair going over our collars. You had to make sure you had socks on. But where really the violation, and I can't believe that even, I'm old, but even way back then, this was allowed. The vice principal would have the girls, if they were wearing a skirt, he would have them get on their knees to make sure that the skirt was touching the ground. And obviously, that would never fly today. And I'm surprised that it was allowed back then. But so there's your, a similarity to getting down on the ground and measuring the heel sizes. So craziness.
But yeah, so I would say when you're writing your dress code or figuring out your dress code, just keeping a lot of that in mind. And then we've actually asked a lot of attorneys, kind of with the changes to DE&I and getting rid of it, what does that mean for certain things? Because a lot of times people in the dress code would still say that it's not going to violate religious reasons or dress codes. If if there's a devout Jewish person that covers their hair, or if it's a Muslim person wearing a hijab, anything like that, like we usually would just have a blanket statement saying that if you have a religious dress code, then kind of that kind of thing is just kind of more of a broad statement. But with the changes in the regulations, if you have government contracts or anything like that, just kind of be aware of how that may impact your business and things like that. Even if you have like specific DE&I policies in general, training and things like that. Another company I was speaking with, pretty much they're in California, pretty much said they were doubling down on their DE&I and they were, going to keep it. And they do have federal contracts, and they are aware that is going to put their federal contracts in jeopardy. So just be cautious of some of these policies that are fine now, but go back and read them and see how that may impact some of your contracts if you have any.
In the dress code, I think you can either get very specific, and correct me if I'm wrong here, you can get very specific, or you can have it be more, hey, this is what the overall culture, the feel is of our dress code. I do remember, back in the, I don't know, maybe year 2000-ish, I went to interviewed for a job out in California, Silicon Valley, and I was in a full suit, and they looked at me like I was crazy. And and they're like, what are you wearing? Why are you dressed up like that? And so apparently I didn't do my homework, and they're like, nobody dresses like that around here. You dress casual. And and they laid the law as far as it, what the culture is. And so I think, they didn't get specific and say, this is what you have to wear, but it was just more casual. And that was the culture that was given. And before we move on, there is a question. Joshua has a question as far as If you offer, do you need to offer sick leave and vacation if you, oop, it just bounced up here. If you have unlimited PTO policy?
It depends on your state. So the and I'll ask you, I'll answer the other, but let me answer the dress code thing real fast too. You can have either a very specific dress code policy, or you could have a more broad one.
Okay.
Depending, if you have something that is broad, it gives the company more flexibility on how they want to enforce it. So if you get very, very specific, you are pigeonholing how you enforce it. So
Okay.
I tend to have most of the policies with our clients be a little more vague to give the company more control. And if you have something that is very specific and it is not violating something that specific, you may tie your hands on how that person can be treated, or it could look like you're treating them unfairly if it doesn't fall into a broader category. So it's
Perfect.
It's just more of how you want to define what you want, but also give yourself how you want to manage the company too.
Okay.
For unlimited time off, works in most states depending on the time off requirements for those states. So a lot of states and counties and city municipalities will have specific sick leaves, vacation leaves, and required paid disability leave, or short term or family leave acts now. I don't have them all memorized, but there are quite a few in California that are very specific to different cities. The city of Chicago is very specific with required paid leave for both part-time and full-time. New York is another one. New Jersey, Washington State. So there's a lot. But basically, if you are not in a location that has a required specific leave, then you can have unlimited and you would be fine. With the states that do have required leaves, a lot of times they state that if you have a policy that at least treats them in a way that is in compliant with the law, then you're in compliant with the law. You can always treat the employees better than the law. You just can't treat them worse. So if you have, for example, an unlimited vacation policy, but it doesn't specifically state anything about using it for sick leave, and there's a required sick leave, you either just have to change your policy to specifically state that language, or you have to also give a sick leave bucket that is required but per that compliance. For unlimited vacation. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And the reason for, so we specifically call them out, and the reason, this doesn't apply necessarily to Mike's unlimited, or if anyone has an unlimited policy, but PTO, if you have defined PTO, you don't have to, upon separation with that employee, you don't have to pay out the PTO, or you have to pay out the PTO, but you do not have to pay out unused sick leave.
Correct. And that's a good distinction too. You can define, depending on the law of the state, you can define in your policies what you want to roll over. California, for example, you cannot have a use it or lose it policy where, let's say, for example, only 40 hours rolls over and the rest is forfeited. In the state of California, you're not allowed to take anything away from a person. Most other states you can. And so there's also the idea that you can stop accruing. So you can say you can accrue up to X hours. And then if you hit that max, we're just not giving you anything else. And that's another like workaround. The unlimited vacation, I've seen companies have a hard time managing the expectation of that when someone wants to take like a month off or much longer than that, or if they need to go on FMLA for 12 weeks. I mean, even if someone is under 50 employees and they don't technically, qualify for FMLA, someone who, gets pregnant and decides they, want the full 12 weeks or parental leave or anything like that, they start to get into how do they manage someone that is asking for long periods of time, other than the policy states that it's, under approvement and it needs to be approved and things like that. So those are some of the things
really
that
bad idea.
I've seen companies get more away from it than keeping it, because it just became too hard to manage and people were just requesting time off that they couldn't approve. And then they would get really upset about the whole, it's not really an unlimited vacation policy kind of situation.
Yeah. I have 2 pages on my manual just dedicated to the New York State laws, and then all the little, do you pay it out at the end of the year, unused, and if it's more than 40 hours, does it somehow become overtime when you pay it out, and all that? Like, it's all spelled out. And I don't know why you wouldn't, because that could cost you a lot.
Oh my gosh, if it turned into overtime when you paid it out.
Right. No,
that would be worse than what we do in California.
Do not put that out in the universe. I have, knock on wood, I have never had any employee expect that upon payout, and I hope I never run across that.
Well, we also have it in there that you have to use your PTO time before taking unpaid PTO time.
Mm-hmm.
And things like that.
That's usually it's a good rule of thumb too, to state that especially if you have different buckets saying when they can and can't be put together. So if they're or requiring that they exhaust both before anything goes unpaid, and things like that. So defining how you want to do that is important too. If you want, sick to be also considered personal time off. So if they want a last minute day off, mental health day, whatever, versus defining vacation as approved in advance and things like that. So we've had to, especially with COVID and things like that, people going out being sick for a long period of time, having to lump together both sick and vacation because they just didn't have enough time. Or just long leaves. So some of those policies got better defined because of COVID, but a lot of times it just depends on how you want to manage your policies, and it's a financial risk is kind of also the other thing, because when you have it in your policy that you're going to pay out PTO, and or it's just known of that what the balances are, most of the time you're at some point your CFO or controller should be evaluating the balances, and that's a risk that's just kind of added to the books too. I think most companies do it quarterly, but it depends on your bookkeeping. Any other questions before we move on? How are we on time? I don't even know what time it is.
We've got about 11 minutes left.
Okay. For security and compliance, I would say to kind of focus on things that obviously things you want, but things you don't want, and, limit things that are considered, inappropriate use for certain things, especially when it comes to devices, networks, password securities, obviously cybersecurity, anything like that that's going to help protect the company. A lot of states require training anyway, but there's states that don't. So the ones that don't is where you'll want to make sure that you're conducting training, but also, especially when it comes to your data protection, but also tracking it and confirming that people sign off on completing it. That'll also help you with your insurance policies too, in case you do have a breach as well. So certain things like that, just kind of putting in the requirements. If you have required training, to complete that, even if it's not a legally required training, you just make it required for your own company, that you list that in there, that they, as part of their job, are required to complete training annually or whatever it might be. And things of that nature. You usually can also have a non-disclosure agreement, and any other things that you'll want to reference. Usually I would say have that as separate outside of your handbook. And then those are, other, I would say, agreements and notifications that people are signing. But you can definitely reference that, that those other agreements exist and things of that nature, so that they're aware of them in more than one place. Especially if you happen to mess up your onboarding and don't get them to sign everything, which has happen too. All of a sudden, something happens to the person, you want to deal with letting them go, and you go digging in your folders or your files for everything and start finding out that missing documents weren't signed. So it can help a little bit too. So any questions on this one? We kind of touched on compliance quite a bit. Okay. And then performance, we've kind of talked quite a bit about this one too, but there's definitely documenting the standards and making sure that there's a lot about accountability and traceability, really. But basically it comes down to being able to find those documents and defend the company. So if someone is not performing, that you're putting them on a performance evaluation period or something like that, a PIP, anything like that. Also, the other thing if you put in your handbook that you have like a 90-day probationary period, actually follow through with that. There's a lot of times where, if there's a few states where it's helpful to have it formally, a lot of times it doesn't matter. If you let them go within the 90-day probationary period, they could still get unemployment. It just depends on the law in that state and how far back they go. They could go back to the previous employer, and it depends on how many hours they worked and things like that too. But a lot of times you can at least define your probationary period, what the expectations are, and if they're not meeting those standards, they may not have certain benefits. They may not be able to use their time off until they're out of that probationary period. A lot of states, you can design it that way too, and other benefits and things like that. So there's certain things that you can outline that would be in your favor, just so that you can kind of set expectations for that probationary period. And your handbook is the best place to do that, unless you have a separate signed policy, because there's ways that you'll just want people to sign off on that all at once. So it's just nice to have that in your handbook.
How about in the area of political discussions? We certainly want to remain neutral. We don't want to be getting into any political discussions with our clients. So I'm just wondering, where that comes into play. Interestingly, a few weeks ago, I don't know if it was on Reddit, and I did a little research just because it boggled me that it was you could do this, but it appears that in many states, you can terminate an employee for their political beliefs, which really surprised me. Is that actually true?
I haven't heard of anyone doing that.
That's wild.
I don't know if it would be considered legal. I would actually feel like that would be an attorney question, to be more specific, and probably that specific state too. And I haven't come across it, so I don't know the answer. But it's, you can certainly put that they can't discuss like political beliefs or something of that nature. We did have to, I had a company in Chicago that we had to get really granular about it, because we had people that went to is it the DNC, the convention that was held there. It might have been the
DNC.
Was it the DNC that was held there? So people went to that and posted pictures of them attending that. And then it was like, well, you're kind of displaying your political views. What if, you've got people that are Republican versus, Democrat, and that could be construed as, it was just posting on their own personal LinkedIn. And then it was like, well, you work for our company, eventually we basically got to the point where we asked people to take it down, and basically saying, if you don't mind, would you mind taking it down? And then we had to figure out a policy on social media and put it under that, on how we wanted people to, display and certain things that we could or couldn't restrict them. But we really had to get with attorneys to figure out the language for that. And we really kind of just left it broad enough to say that, it wasn't necessarily politically motivated for the policy, but it was more about the, just the reputation of the company in general while you're working for the company or something like that. So that I've had to deal with. But as far as the specifically saying do not talk about things, that would be an interesting one to probably get an attorney's take on.
I just posted my text in there. It's under the conflicts of interest heading.
Okay.
And it says, in any way conflict or reflect poorly on the company.
Yeah.
So
something like that. The only thing you cannot put in writing is telling people not to talk about their pay, because there is regulation under, it's the Right to Unionize Act. There's a whole governing sector for it that is escaping my brain at the moment. But that one, you cannot say that they can't talk about bonuses or pay or anything else. You can kind of allude to things, but you can't outright say that they can't, and it's against the policy to do so, kind of thing. But as far as like their political views, yeah, it would kind of be something you could probably say it's certain language, and that's great language to add in there. The one thing about progressive disciplinary procedures I wanted to talk about was a lot of times sample policies or sample handbooks or standardized handbooks or anything like that naturally come with like a tiered discipline procedure. And if you just leave it alone and don't touch it, can kind of pigeonhole you again into like not having a lot of flexibility. So if you, or even if you do want to say, oh, well, first you're going to get a verbal warning, then you're going to get a written warning, and then you're going to, have a second written warning, and then a third written warning, and then you'll be terminated, kind of stacked discipline procedures. A lot of times you just want to add language that the company has the right to, move through any of those at will kind of situations, because they can make it situational.
You just put up to and including termination.
Termination. Yeah.
Just put that for
so
everything.
Those kinds of things, just be real careful about if those are really things you do, if you naturally do follow that progression, or just, kind of give yourself a lot more freedom to discipline people as you need to. And just state disciplinary procedures could include any of the following is another way to do it. So just be careful on some of those like templates when they come out. And so some of the most common mistakes is, with generic templates without customization may not directly reflect your actual structure. And when that happens, you're putting the company at risk. So what I've seen happen is if you, let's say you even did update a lot of it and some things stay that are not accurate or even not legal in your situation or industry or location. If you are trying to enforce certain policies and you're under a legal situation, a judge can throw out your entire handbook or throw out an entire agreement just because certain areas of it were illegal or inconsistent with how you actually behave. So if you have a policy that was how you actually acted and you did follow the policy, but you have changed your practice since then, or you have set a precedence that is against that policy, then it's no longer enforceable. And so a lot of times someone just has to prove that there's a different precedence than the policy. But anyway, a judge can decide to throw the whole thing out. And then you have to, be forced to start all over kind of situations. It's not a legal review of a document kind of situation to put somebody against it. It tends to happen more with non-compete agreements. If you have a clause in your non-compete or even your non-disclosure agreements that they can't hold it up in court, they'll throw the whole thing out, and then you can't enforce any of it. So things like that to be careful about. And why is something else popping up? Go away. Okay. And let me go down. Outdated or missing information. So especially when it comes to new and just the way things change. So with like remote work, for example, anything that could happen with like the security gaps with that. So if you haven't updated your handbook, especially since COVID or anything else like that, you'll definitely want to make sure you have remote work and leave policies and things like that are how you actually want to behave. Not having clear policies around your tech security, which I would assume you would all have at this point. But if you don't, then obviously making sure you have things like that, or just anything that is contradictory between itself in your own handbook, especially if you're starting with a template, and kind of and obviously not forgetting any kind of specific or state labor laws that are going to be important for you. And then things that you should have, obviously your cybersecurity policy, your remote work, your confidentiality information, again, safeguarding against customer information, sensitive information, and incident responses, how people should be, reporting incidences, emergencies, especially for injuries, worker comp, things like that. Where do they go? Who do they go to? And, that kind of thing, especially for small teams. It may all be the owner of the company or something like that. So if there's certain specific people, definitely defining that in templates, that might be something that it might default to just say HR when you don't have HR. So that kind of thing, just watch out for that. And so obviously how to do things right, make sure you're getting a legal review or HR review of your handbook, or having it, written for you. Use plain language. So avoiding, really complex legalese kind of thing. People need to be able to read and understand it. Make sure they know where to go to have questions, having it both digital and acknowledgements. So you can enforce it, having just to sign a signature page on it. Training your managers and your company so that everyone knows how to enforce it. If you having people go off the cuff, that really gets you in trouble. Just being able to enforce your own policies and review things annually. So
Awesome.
kind of making sure your handbook is a living document, and kind of just check up on it and use it for your protection kind of thing.
Awesome. Very
That's
good
everything.
information. I think we covered a lot and more. I think we packed a lot in the last hour. As always, I want to thank you for your time. I have included Michelle's a link to her LinkedIn in the chat. So be sure to reach
I could
out to her.
throw. Oh, I know she's probably got another meeting to hop onto too. One
Yeah.
question though.
Mhm.
You said you've got 40 employees.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have a couple in New York and California that can keep up with those laws? Is that how you do it?
Yeah, kind of. So I actually have more of an expert. She lives in New Jersey, though. We use Cal Chamber as a resource for California, and we partner with a couple of law firms that we use to check up on for any kind of legal questions that we have. And then she just does a lot of research when it comes to writing all of our handbooks and state addendums and things like that. So, we have a lot of clients in California and New York. So she's kind of our go-to person when people have
Okay.
questions about how to manage those clients.
Okay.
I learn from her constantly. Like, I have no idea what's going on half the time.
It
I'm like, yeah,
changes
there's a
all
lot.
the time. Yeah, that's why I was trying to
Right.
figure out how you could keep up, but that would
Mhm.
make sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like one person's whole job.
Awesome. Yeah, everybody, be sure to reach out to Michelle if you have any kind of HR needs. Being fractional, providing fractional services is a great way for us as MSPs to be able to leverage, organization like Griffin Resources. And so there is the link there. And actually, I should, is it just griffinresources.com?
It's griffin-resources.com.
Okay. Griffin-resources.com. So check out Michelle's website. And Michelle, thank you so much for your time. Everybody, great to see you all. And we'll see everybody on Friday. And take care, everyone. See you.